Rain poured heavily on the windows of a quiet suburban home in Chicago. In the dim light of the living room, 9-year-old Sophie Carter suddenly clutched her father's sleeve with trembling hands. Fear flickered in her wide eyes, unlike anything her father had ever seen. "Please, Daddy, don't go to that meeting tonight," she whispered, her voice shaking. Businessman Michael Carter froze, struck silent by the weight of her words. There was a terror in her eyes that no child should ever carry, a fear too real to dismiss. Outside, thunder rolled and lightning cracked, as if the storm itself echoed her warning. Michael tried to steady his breath, but Sophie's grip only tightened. He had no idea that this innocent plea would soon become the single most important choice of his life. Michael had prepared for this meeting for weeks. It was with high-profile investors downtown, a chance to secure the biggest deal of his career. The conference was at a luxurious hotel ballroom overlooking Lake Michigan. His black suit was pressed, his presentation polished, and everything was timed to perfection. Yet Sophie stood in front of him like a wall, shaking her head, tears brimming in her hazel eyes. "Daddy, please!" "If you go, something bad will happen." Her words weren't casual. They carried the weight of conviction, like she knew the future. Claire pulled Sophie into her arms, whispering, "Sweetheart, what's wrong?" Sophie only repeated, "Don't let him go." The storm outside roared louder, thunder rumbling like an omen. For the first time in years, Michael hesitated about business. Against his better judgment, Michael stayed home, choosing his daughter's fear over his career ambitions. Hours later, as the family sat together watching TV, a breaking news alert flashed across the screen. An explosion at downtown hotel, conference hall destroyed. Michael's heart stopped. That was his meeting. Smoke billowed on live footage, sirens wailed, and terrified survivors stumbled into the streets. Dozens were injured, several lives lost. Claire dropped the remote, her hand covering her mouth. Sophie clung to her father, whispering through tears, "I told you." "Daddy." Michael realized his daughter's desperate plea had saved his life. But the question burned inside him. How did she know? Sophie had no way of knowing about bombs, meetings, or danger. Unless something deeper was at play. The night stretched on, heavy with silence, broken only by the crack of thunder outside. Michael sat in the living room, staring at the rain-soaked window, his daughter's words echoing in his mind. Sophie sat curled up beside him, refusing to let go of his arm, her eyes still swollen from tears. He tried to smile at her, to reassure her, but deep inside his chest, unease gnawed at him like a shadow he couldn't shake off. Then the television flickered, switching to a breaking news alert. Michael's heart stuttered. The anchor's voice was sharp, urgent. "Explosion reported at the downtown Grandview Hotel. The conference hall was destroyed. Multiple casualties." The room froze. Michael's blood ran cold. That was the very place his meeting had been scheduled for. On the screen, chaos unfolded, smoke billowing into the night sky, paramedics rushing through rubble, survivors staggering with blood on their clothes. Claire covered her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. Sophie buried her face against her father's chest, whispering, "I told you, Daddy, I told you." Michael's arms tightened around his daughter, his body trembling as reality sank in. If he had gone, if he had ignored her desperate warning, his face might have been among those shown on the screen, lifeless under the rubble. His throat went dry. He could barely breathe. When the house grew quiet again, Michael carried Sophie upstairs and tucked her into bed. He brushed her hair back gently and asked, "Sweetheart, how did you know?" Sophie's lips quivered. For a moment she hesitated, then whispered, "I saw it, Daddy, last night in my dream. I saw the fire, the people screaming. You were there. I woke up crying and I knew it was real." Michael's chest tightened. Her words cut through him like lightning. Every detail she spoke matched the images on the screen. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't just a child's imagination. His daughter had seen the disaster before it happened. Claire stood by the door, her face pale, trembling at the realization. The storm outside had begun to fade, but inside their home something far greater stirred. Sophie looked up at her father, eyes glistening with innocence and a strange wisdom. "Sometimes I just see things," she whispered. Michael knelt beside her, unable to hold back the tears burning in his eyes. He kissed her forehead and whispered, "You didn't just save me tonight. You saved all of us." In that moment, the fear gave way to something else, an overwhelming truth. His daughter carried a gift, mysterious and powerful, one that had forever Michael sat in the silence of the house, his heart pounding like a drum that refused to quiet. The storm outside had faded into a drizzle, but inside his chest, a storm of realization was raging louder than ever. He looked at Sophie, her small frame wrapped in a blanket, her breathing slow as she drifted into sleep. He thought about the way she had clung to him, the terror in her eyes, the certainty in her voice. He thought about the television screen, the fire, the broken walls of the hotel that could have been his grave. For the first time in his life, Michael Carter, a man who had built an empire on logic, deals, and numbers, found himself surrendering to something he could not measure, faith. He whispered softly to himself, almost afraid of his own voice, "If I hadn't listened." The thought was unbearable. Claire sat quietly across the room, her eyes fixed on him, understanding everything without a word. She knew that night had rewritten their future in ways no one could have predicted. Michael rose slowly, walked to Sophie's room, and stood at the doorway for a long while, just watching her sleep. Each rise and fall of her chest felt like a miracle. He remembered every late night he had missed, tucking her into bed, every business call that had stolen his attention, every promise he had delayed for the sake of money. He remembered how he had once thought success meant skyscrapers and contracts, how he believed time with family could always be postponed until tomorrow. But tonight proved there are no guarantees of tomorrow. He stepped closer, kneeling beside her bed, and whispered, "You are my greatest success." "Sophie!" His voice cracked as the tears came, tears he had not allowed himself to shed in years. He kissed her forehead gently, vowing silently that he would never again let ambition blind him to what truly mattered. He had been given a second chance, a chance many of those men and women at the hotel would never have again. That truth weighed heavy on him, but it also lit a fire inside his heart. The next morning, sunlight poured through the windows, warm and golden, as if the world itself had been washed clean by the storm. Michael sat at the breakfast table with Claire and Sophie, the three of them together without distraction, without rush, without business intruding. Sophie giggled as she spread jelly across her toast, her innocence glowing like a lantern in the dark. Michael watched her carefully. Every sound, every movement, every smile searing itself into his memory. He no longer saw a fragile little girl. He saw strength, he saw wisdom, he saw a gift that most of the world would never understand. And in her laughter he found healing. "Family first," he said suddenly, the words surprising even him. Claire looked at him with soft eyes, the kind that carried years of patience and love. "Always," she replied. From that day forward, Michael Carter was no longer just a businessman. He became a storyteller, a living reminder to others that no amount of money could buy back lost time, that no contract could replace the sound of your child's voice calling your name. He began to share his story at gatherings, not about profits or investments, but about a night when a 9-year-old girl saved her father's life with nothing but her intuition and her love. People listened and people remembered. Some even changed the way they lived, choosing family dinners over late meetings, bedtime stories over business calls. Michael's colleagues noticed the shift in him. He no longer carried the same hunger in his eyes for deals and numbers. Instead, he carried peace, a peace that came from knowing he had faced the edge of death and had been pulled back, not by chance, not by strategy, but by the heart of a child. And every time he looked at Sophie, he felt humbled. Years passed and Sophie grew. She never boasted about her dream, never sought attention for what she had seen. To her, it was just a part of who she was. But to Michael, it was the night the world gave him back his life. Wrapped in the arms of his daughter, on her 13th birthday, he stood before friends and family, raised a glass and said, "This girl is my reason. She is why I wake up every day with gratitude instead of greed. She is the reminder that love is the greatest wealth a man can have." Sophie blushed, embarrassed. But deep down, she knew her father's words came from a place of truth. She hugged him tightly, whispering, "I just didn't want to lose you." "Daddy," and he whispered back, "because of you, I will never lose myself again." As the years rolled on, Sophie's gift appeared in small ways. Subtle warnings, quiet instincts. Sometimes she was right, sometimes she was simply cautious. But Michael never doubted her again. He listened to her heart as much as he listened to his own. And together they built a family story that was whispered through generations. Not about money, not about fame, but about a little girl's plea on a stormy night in Chicago that saved everything. When Michael grew older, his hair turning silver, he often sat on the porch with Sophie. Now a young woman with dreams of her own. They would watch the rain fall, and he would squeeze her hand, remembering that one night long ago. "Rain used to mean danger to me," he told her once. "But now when it falls, I think of hope. Because that night in the storm, you gave me my life back." And Sophie smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder, the sound of rain echoing around them. The world outside was still unpredictable. Storms still came and went, but inside that family, there was strength unshakable. Because one little girl had dared to speak, one father had dared to listen, and love had been enough to rewrite destiny. Michael Carter's name was no longer remembered for buildings or bank accounts. It was remembered for something greater, for the courage to choose family, for the humility to admit he had been saved by his child, and for the wisdom to pass that lesson on. And as long as Sophie lived, she carried that truth inside her heart, that sometimes the smallest voice can save the biggest life, and sometimes the greatest miracles come not from the world outside, but from the love within a home.